emperor, was the real leader of the church. It would also solve the problem of the rogue knights and strengthen the church's power over the unruly feudal princes and produce a magnificent trophy: the recovery of the tomb of Christ, the most revered shrine in Christendom. It might also reunite the grateful Byzantine Christians with Rome, leaving Urban, of course, as the ruling pope. Alexios' letter reached Urban in March 1095, when he was holding a council of the church's leaders in Piacenza, Italy. He pondered it for 7 months. Then, in November, at a council held in the French city of Clermont, the Pope made one of the most remarkable and consequential speeches in history. He proposed that Christian knights go to war in the East to help the Byzantines and to rescue the Holy Land. He apparently took pains to advertise well in advance that he would have something important to announce. Historians say the crowds were so huge that the meeting had to be held in an open field. There are 5 widely varying versions of the Pope's actual speech, none of them written less than 2 years later, and only one by a man who was confirmed to be there. A cleric named Fulcher of Chartres, probably in 1101 or later, wrote his version before a chronicle of the First Crusade had been circulated. Fulcher quotes Urban urging all people of whatever rank to carry aid promptly to those Christians in Constantinople and to destroy that vile race of Turkish invaders. The Pope promises immediate remission of sins and entry to paradise for anyone who dies on the mission, exhorting both knights and brigands who have been making mischief and quarrelling among themselves to unite for a higher purpose and obtain the eternal reward. Robert the monk, who may or may not have been at Clermont, wrote a better speech. It began by describing the atrocities of the accursed race of Muslims torturing Christian victims. Then, Robert said, Urban admonished good Christians to take Jerusalem, a land that floweth with milk and honey, from the infidels, and subject it to yourselves. Do this, Urban said, for the remission of your sins, with the assurance of the imperishable glory of the kingdom of heaven. When Pope Urban had said this, Robert the monk wrote, all who were present were moved to cry out, "It is the will of God! It is the will of God!" Urban, he said, told the vast throng that all of them could not have had the same thought at once unless God was speaking through them. Urging them to make that chant their battle cry, "God wills it," became the Pope's call to arms of the First Crusade. Thousands in the vast audience immediately took the cross, sewing 2 strips of cloth onto the right side of their outer garments. In the next few months, Urban recruited leaders for his grand army, sending letters to nobles across Europe and encouraging eloquent preachers to whip up enthusiasm for the mission among the common people. Time, exorbitant funds, and organization were clearly needed. The Pope prodded feudal leaders to raise money to support their knights and set the date of August 15th, the feast of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, as the target for the army of God to set out. Europe was ready for the Pope's call. By the civilized standards of Asia and the Middle East, Central Europe was a backward, dirty land, still mired in the ignorance and poverty of the Dark Ages that followed the collapse of the Roman Empire. The Catholic Church was the continent's one strong institution. Its monks and priests instilled a love of Christ in nobles and peasantry alike, tainted with the consciousness of sin and fear of eternal damnation. What passed for government was supplied by feudal rulers who fought constantly with their neighbours for control of the land. To earn their lord's protection, knights and peasants paid him tribute and loyally took arms against his enemies. This obligation often amounted to 40 days of soldierly service a year. Urban offered an alternative to the multitudes of poor and hungry beaten down by their masters, who could barely scrape out a living. They now had dazzling visions of a land of milk and honey in the East. The Pope promised their sins would be washed away, and heaven surely awaited any who died on the mission. If they survived, they envisioned themselves sweeping away the infidels and harvesting their riches, then living happily ever after.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.